Surely many of you have heard the story of the meeting of Prophet Sulaiman and Queen Balqis. But here we will not tell that, because behind the story, there is another interesting side to discuss. Namely, is it true that Queen Balqis was a half-human, half-genie? Please, my fellow believers, watch this video until the end to avoid mistakes and misunderstandings. Therefore, in this video we will discuss the origins of Queen Balqis. Peace be upon you, friends of the Jazeera of Knowledge, who are glorified by Allah. May we always be in good health. Amen, O Lord of the worlds. Balqis was a famous queen from a kingdom called Saba. There are different opinions among historians regarding the location of the Saba kingdom. Some say it was located in southern Arabia, namely the country of Yemen. However, there is also another opinion that says this kingdom was in the Horn of Africa, or more precisely in the country of Ethiopia. But there are also those who have a different opinion. That opinion comes from K.H. Fahmy Basya. He stated that the Ratu Boko temple in Yogya was the palace of Queen Balqis. But a stronger opinion is that Queen Balqis Palace was located in Yemen, northwest of the city of Marib. Because there were found ruins of buildings that historians estimate, the ruins of the building date back to the 1300s BC. And this fits if associated with the heyday of the Saba kingdom. So why is it called the Saba kingdom? The name Saba is taken from the name of the first king of the kingdom, namely Saba bin Yazjab bin Yarib bin Khotan. As narrated by Imam Zainuddin Abdur Rauf al-Manawi in Fatal al-Qadir, before Queen Balqis was born, Queen Balqis' father, who was then king of the Saba kingdom, had a unique hobby. He really enjoyed hunting. The king's goal in hunting was not to find food, but only for pleasure or entertainment. One day when the king was hunting, while in the middle of the forest, he felt very thirsty. From a distance he saw a tent. Then the king came to it. He wanted to ask the owner of the tent for a drink of water. After the king approached the tent, an old man came out from inside the tent. Then the king asked this old man to provide him with a drink. The old man immediately called his son from outside the tent to bring him a glass of water. Well, from inside the tent came a woman who turned out to be very beautiful like the sun, and in her hand held a cup filled with water made of hyacinth. The king was stunned by this beautiful face of this woman. He became interested and intended to propose to her. So the king immediately conveyed his intention to this old man, who was none other than the father of this woman. The father of this girl was frank with the king that they were from the jinn nation. But the king did not care. And long story short, the two were married, but with one condition. If the king asked something about his wife's actions, then that question would be a divorce for him. This means, friends, if one day there is something strange about his wife, then the king is not allowed to ask why his wife did it. If the king asks, then both of them must divorce. Friends of the Jazeera of Knowledge that is glorified by Allah. After the two were officially married, they were blessed with a son. The king was overjoyed to learn that the child born was a boy. Surely one day this child could be the heir to the throne when the king died. However, friends, without the king's knowledge, the boy was killed by his own mother. When the king learned this, he became very sad. In addition, he was afraid to ask his wife about the reason why the child was killed. Because if the king asked about the reason, it would mean the two of them would divorce. In the end, the king could only remain silent and suppress his curiosity. My friends of the same faith, after a few years later, his wife became pregnant and gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Balqis. And fortunately, their second child was not killed again. The king looked happy but mixed with anxiety. Finally, one day the king could not contain his curiosity. He went to his wife and asked why his son was killed. Hearing this question, his wife became sad because according to the agreement, if her husband asked about it, divorce would occur immediately. With mixed feelings, his wife said, "Is this your retribution? I killed that boy for defending you. In fact, my father has stolen news from the sky." Quote, she heard an angel say, "When the child grows up, he will kill you." My father also stole news from the sky about this girl. He heard that many angels praised her and many of them described his kingdom. As you promised at that time, this is the separation between me and you. Then the king's wife from the jinn nation left and was never seen again. My fellow believers, in the book of interpretation of Imam al-Qurtubi there is a different story about the origins of Queen Balqis. The short story is like this, friends. Balqis' father was a minister in a kingdom. Well, the king of that kingdom had a bad habit, namely the king liked to force the wives of his subjects to serve the king's lust. The minister of the kingdom or Balqis' father was a very jealous man. That's why she decided not to marry. Because he was afraid that if he had a wife, the king would force his wife to serve his depraved lust. One day when the minister was on a journey, he accidentally met a stranger. Then the stranger asked the minister, "Oh sir, do you have a wife?" Then the minister replied, "I will not marry forever because the king in our country likes to force the wives of his people." Then the stranger replied, "If you want to marry my daughter, then stoning will never be able to force him." And the minister replied, "How could the king still force him?" Then the stranger said, "Indeed, we are a nation of jinn where your king will not be able to force us." Finally, after knowing this, the minister agreed. Long story short, the minister married the daughter of the stranger. Then their daughter was born who was given the name Balqis. Friends of the Jazeera of knowledge who are glorified by Allah. The third version of the story comes from the book of interpretation of Ibn Adil, which also tells about the origins of Queen Balqis. As told in the book, Balqis' father was a king in Yemen who came from the descendants of the great Ya'b bin Qatan. One day he said to other kings who were outside his realm. King Ya'b bin Qatan said, "None of you is worthy of me." Because of his arrogance, King Jacob did not want to marry the daughters of kings who were outside his control. Finally, the king was married to a woman from the jinn group named Rayhana bin Sakan. Then from the results of their second marriage, they only had one child, named Balqis. Another history states that evidence that Balqis was half human and half genie is that when Balqis entered Prophet Sulaiman's palace, he lifted his trousers slightly so that his two calves were visible. because Balqis thought he would pass through a large pool, even though it is a floor made of glass. Well, in this incident there was a scholar who said that when Balqis lifted his trousers, Prophet Sulaiman was shocked because he saw that Queen Balqis' two calves were covered with hair, unlike human women in general. It signifies that she is half human and half genie. It was said to her, "Enter the palace." So when she saw the floor of the palace, she thought it was a large pool of water and uncovered her two legs. Solomon said, "Indeed, it is a smooth palace made of glass." Balqis said, "My lord, indeed I have wronged myself and I submit with Solomon to Allah, Lord of the worlds." Al-Quran, Surah Animal, verse 44. There are even some commentators who believe that the glass floor was deliberately made by Solomon specifically to welcome Queen Balqis and also to prove whether what people said was true, that the queen of the Sheba kingdom was half human and half genie.
Baru! Box Gummy Candy Emoji Pops. So yummy, so gummy!
Actually, friends, there are still several other versions of the story regarding the origins of Queen Balqis. This story is included in the books of historians. So a famous scholar from Iraq conveyed it in his interpretation book entitled Ruhul Ma'ani. The hadith that tells of one of Balqis' parents being a genie is a hadith with weak support, and the story surrounding marriage with a genie is merely a legend that is not found in the Quran or authentic hadith. Kiti Dalamul Bayan also concluded that the hadith about Balqis' parents is a deef hadith. Likewise, the Asar that tells the history of the two of them has no reliable basis. Even Al-Mawardi opposed the marriage of humans with genies and considered it irrational because they are from different species and therefore have different natures. Humans are physical, while genies are spiritual. Humans come from the earth as stated in the Quran, Surah Rahman verse 14. Meanwhile, genies are created from the flame of fire in the Quran, Surah Rahman verse 15. These differences cannot be united and it is impossible to produce a child. So, which do you think is correct? Was Balqis a full human, half genie, or indeed neither? And Allah knows best. So that's the story about the origins of Queen Balqis. Hopefully this story is useful. Please forgive any more or less. The truth comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The mistake or error came from me personally as an ordinary human being. See you in exciting stories full of meaning. Next I finish. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.